Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to Politics in the Pub. My name's Howard Bell. I'm chairing this evening. How lucky we are to live in Australia and to be able to have forums like this where we can come along and we can say what we like. And in particular, we can criticise our governments. Unlike in Thailand, where a gentleman was jailed for 27 years in the last week or so for criticising the Thai monarchy on Facebook. Now, I can understand somebody losing their job or being disciplined or maybe being fined for saying something stupid on Facebook. But going to jail for more than a quarter of a century, how scary is that?
It's all right, I've protested.
Alice. Let's hear it for Alice for protesting. Alice, even if you hadn't said that, I knew you would have protested because, in fact, you were the first person I thought of when I was reading that news article. Alice will be out there marching down the street about this, and this may reduce. So hopefully that person will not spend 27 years in jail. But so I just wanted to mention that it's got nothing to do with tonight's topic at all, but it's a celebration, my private little celebration, if you like, about the fact that we can come here and have intelligent community discussions about topics. And even if we are critical of a decision maker or a government, we're not necessarily going to end up in jail for 27 years. Not yet anyway. Not as things currently stand. Well, ladies and gentlemen, tonight's topic is the market power of the duopoly of Coles and Woolworths, the growing cost to customers, suppliers and community, consumer activism, effective and now essential. A very, very important topic, and one which affects all of us because we all go to the supermarket at some stage. We all go and buy our groceries and we make our choices, or some would say we exercise the illusion of choice. Maybe that should have been the topic on the title, the illusion of choice. I don't know what Christopher and Gordon would say about that, but
find out.
In any event, Christopher Zenn is an independent consultant and a former director of campaigns and communications for Choice. Gordon Renouf is the co-founder of the ethical consumer organisation Good On You. And can I say good on you for founding that? And he's the former head of policy and campaigns at Choice. So from that Choice background, can I introduce both of them to you? Invite you to join me in extending them a very warm welcome to Politics in the Pub.
Thank you very much, Howard. And I hate to disagree with you, is the first thing I'd say, but actually part of the problem with the supermarkets was not that they would jail people, but people who were suppliers were too scared to speak out. In 2008 there was an inquiry and the ACCC couldn't get anyone to talk about the market abuses for supermarkets. That has changed more recently and we'll talk about that, but certainly while there was no legal prescription on people, there was definitely a fear, and that is one element of the market power which deserves some scrutiny. Look, it's great to be here for two reasons. One, I started my life in Australia in Wigram Road for one night, so I'm very glad to be back. Two, beer is something very close to me, and I'm glad to be enjoying an independently brewed beer, because one of the great consumer movements in the world is CAMRA, the Campaign for Real Ale, which in the 1970s in Britain overturned the attempt of the big brewers to take over all the small independents and the pubs. And there was a public backlash, which actually really demonstrates what people power can achieve. And I think if we had more of an attachment to our local shops, in the same way that British people do have to their local pubs and their beer, we might not have seen the duopoly grow the way that it did do. But of course you need some management and control about that. So look, it's great that you're all here being late night shopping, because you could all be at the various supermarkets going around buying everything that is on offer. I actually like going to supermarkets, and I've enjoyed this, so I get the brochures every week and I look through them, half price everything, you know, and look, and there's courtesies recipes and how to feed a family for $10. But, you know, sometimes you've got to wonder, how do they do it? How do they make it so cheap? How is it impossible for anyone else to compete? And then actually something like Aldi comes along and they do compete on the price, and they make some of those things even cheaper. So you've got to ask, what's going on? And again, in my childhood, my father used to do the shopping and I used to go with him, and he was very value conscious, not price conscious, but value. So he'd look at the labels and determine what was in it, and he'd take his time, and I enjoy doing that. So I'm one of those rare people who enjoys going to supermarkets. So look, I'm not saying that we know all the answers, but we'll certainly share our experience, and hopefully, I think it's about time that the backlash about the duopoly began again. It's had various kind of peaks over the years. I think it's been pretty quiet for too long. And I know there's been a lot of fuss about Woolworths and Anzac this week. That's a bit of a distraction, but I think it shows they are fallible. They do some dumb things, and really we need to scrutinise what they both do far more closely, make sure that they just don't progress lying down. And I did ask Wynne. Now, you said everyone goes to the supermarket. Wynne told me that she's never been to a supermarket. She does all her buying in independence, so well done. Because that comes at a very real direct cost to you. But I've got a little cartoon here. It's from a British magazine. I'll just tell you, it's got some people walking up and down the street, and there's Sainsbury's, McDonald's, Costa, and the caption is, "Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains." And I think that's actually a very interesting question to ask all the way through this. We are free, but why do we keep going to chains? In this case, we're talking about Coles and Woolworths, and there's very good reasons why we do that. Then there's some other reasons we might look more closely at. So look, how are we going to run this? I'm going to say some introductory things for about 4 minutes, then Gordon's going to say something, and this is in terms of the introduction and the setup around the issue. Then we're going to talk about what has been billed of the costs to consumers and suppliers in the community of the two, and then for our final 5 minutes we'll hopefully come up with some sort of solutions or reality check as to what this all means. So I'm not going to apologise if there's a shopping list of issues around here, because, you know, the reach of these people is extraordinary. Insurance, pharmacies they want to get into, banking, liquor, hardware, you name it, almost anything you buy, and it might be West Farmers instead of Coles, but you know, you could actually live most of your life. And in fact, I plead guilty. I left it home today and a letter arrived. The one letter was the renewal for my Coles home insurance. Because you know what? They have a very good offering. They have helped bring. They sell life insurance now. They've sold 250,000 life insurance policies, Coles, because they can make it inexpensive. They can make it understandable to ordinary people. And given the problem there is with underinsurance, you know, there are some things they do and they can do which are very good. Look, we will talk about Aldi and Costco and really where they come into it. And again, I'm always intrigued by people who say what a great thing it is that Aldi and how good they are, and Costco, how good they are. But actually, I'd suggest, you know, while they are just small players, and Aldi actually arrived in 2001, now has 10% of the East Coast market. They're moving to South Australia and Western Australia. It's probably a good thing. But, you know, in terms of supply, while they seem to have better relationships with their suppliers, I'd suggest that they could be, you know, if they got to 30 or 40%, would be arguing for the same issue here, because there are some of the common areas and concerns about food, where it comes from, what value, what we pay for it, or whatever. Again, in 2008, when we were working at Choice, the ACCC, you know, did inquiries into supermarkets, but they didn't really do very much. Wow, how it's changed. You know, Rod Sims, it's like a barrage of fire coming down all the time. Last week, $2.5 million fine over the fresh bread scandal for Coles. In December, $10 million fine over unconscionable conduct to suppliers. No end of issues that are really causing them a great deal of pain. In terms of petrol, you know, scrutiny in terms of price signalling that they do in their petrol area, their shopper docket discounts being wound down to 4 cents and perhaps 8 cents under certain conditions to protect independence in the market. So there's really been a lot of action, and Graham Samuel, who was running the ACCC, he just said last week that it was more competitive. The area was more competitive than it had been for years in terms of the two big supermarkets. But the issue around there is, well, what's the problem? Do we actually have a problem? And I hope that we can actually talk about that. Now, there is a backlash happening in Britain at the moment. Tesco, which was the great champion where many of the people who run Australian supermarkets come from, is in big trouble at the moment. But again, we'll ask, is that just a minor interruption, a disruption, or are we seeing a real change? And I'll just finish by ending one of the great quandaries of this area is when the $1 milk came in, when it was originally Coles who introduced it. There was a Senate inquiry, a lot of fuss, you'll remember, and I was in a Senate inquiry looking at this, and at Choice we were not arguing against $1 a litre milk, but we were raising some concerns, and a Liberal senator turned to me and said, well, how can you be from a consumer organisation and argue against cheap food for pensioners? And, you know, while it was a trick question, it was a very good point. So, you know, there's been a lot of utility for customers, consumers, given by the price war that goes on with the big two. Anyway, I shall just hand you over to Gordon.
Are you sure that beer is not owned by a major?
I'm not actually. I know it's Rocks, and I know that many of them, James Squire, are, and there's some Ersatz one in between, but it tastes pretty good. So, you know, it's like... That's good enough.
Sit down. Thank you. Great to be here. I don't need the beer for now, do I? Okay. So I'm just going to go through a few facts and figures about why there might be a problem. And as Chris said, we'll get to some commentary on that in our second goes.
Can you come closer to the microphone?
Can I come closer to the microphone?
They won't hear you
okay.
otherwise.
So I'm going to go through a few facts and figures about why there might be a problem. I'm going to try and make a joke about the two Ronnies, but it's gone out of my head. So that's right. So why might there be a problem? First of all, we have the most concentrated supermarket in the world, sector in the world. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Secondly, one of the reasons for that is that there are many barriers to entry into the market. It's hard for people to compete, but it's not impossible. The third is that people could dominate a market and they could be very nice to their competitors and their customers and their suppliers, or they could abuse their market power. And there's some evidence of areas where they, of course, abuse their market power. Why wouldn't you if you could? And thirdly, there is an argument about whether these particular companies, Coles and Woolworths, are more profitable than a typical company. We'll talk about that. And I think there's a very important issue, which I was going to make a surprise, but seeing both Christopher and Harold have mentioned it, that is that is it really about choice? Is it an illusory choice? And I think you are absolutely spot on with that question. So concentration, really quickly. So it's often claimed that we have the most concentrated supermarket sector in the world, and the Conversation recently did a fact check, the Conversation fact checker as opposed to the ABC fact check, and they said basically that's true, but there was a bit of a but. So our three biggest suppliers, Coles, Woolies and IGA Metcash, have or had 95% of the market. Our two biggest suppliers have 75%, 77% of the market. That compares with Germany, where the two biggest have 65%, the UK where they have 50%, the US where they have 40%. So you can see we're more concentrated than all of those countries, and nobody's pointed out to any other major country that has a similar problem. Level of concentration. However, that's in the dry goods sector. Concentration is much less in the fresh food and meat sector, where it's about 45-47%. It's worth remembering. Online is not very big in Australia, online ordering of food rather. There's lots of other industries where online's bigger. It's about 3% of the total sales, and it's similarly concentrated, but there are some different new players there, so there is scope as online may grow that there may be more competition. We'll see. So the second thing I want to talk about was barriers to entry. What stops somebody just setting up a new supermarket next to Coles and Woolies? Two things have been important. One of those is that although we think of Coles and Woolworths as shops that sell food and groceries, they're actually landowners. They own a lot of land, and they are very ahead of where they want to be with buying land. So they'll go into a new development and they say, where's the best place for the shop? What are the zoning requirements here? Let's buy that land. We might want it one day. So they've got the best land before anybody else comes along. Secondly, they use their bargaining. You know, when somebody wants to set up a new shopping mall, they want to have a head anchor tenant. Unless they're big enough to have DJs and Myers, the head anchor tenant is likely to be Coles or Woolworths. Wols, there we go, Wols. It's my shorthand for both. And until recently, Coles and Woolworths would use their bargaining power to insist on a clause, a restrictive covenant in legal terms, a clause in the contract with the shopping centre owner saying, you can't let any other supermarkets in here. So we're Woolies, we're here, nobody else can come in. Or there is a Woolies and a Coles and a bigger one, but no Aldi's, no anybody like that. So that's why you find Aldi often in funny places. Because when they came to Australia, what was it, 2001, they couldn't get into supermarkets because of these restrictive covenants. Now that particular problem was addressed by the ACCC in their 2008 inquiry, and over a 5-year period, all the 4 major companies, Coles, Woolworths, IGA and Aldi, have agreed not to put those clauses into their contracts with landlords. Whether we'll actually see 3 or 4 supermarkets in one shopping centre is yet to be seen. Okay, what about profits? There seems to be different stories. Graham Samuel, the former head of the ACCC and Liberal Party treasurer, he and Stephen King wrote a paper in 2013 where they said Coles and Woolies profits are not particularly out of the ordinary. They're nothing compared to someone like Tesco or Walmart in the States. Conversely, Rod Sims, the current ACCC chairman, was in the paper last month saying their profit margins are too high. And certainly, I don't think it's controversial, everybody agrees that Woolies' profit EBIT, before interest and tax, I don't understand that perfectly, but a net profit measure of 7% 2 years ago and 7.5% last year is pretty high for a corporation. But are they making those profits from food and groceries, or are they making from booze, from insurance, from maybe not yet from insurance, but certainly from booze and a few other things that they sell? So jury out on whether they're super profitable. Abuse of market power. The main argument here is around farmers, but we as consumers have a bit of an ambiguous relation to that. But I think it's a bit more complicated. I think the different suppliers have different positions. If you're a large international supplier of household brands like a Unilever or a Procter & Gamble, which make up a good percentage of their stock, or a really big Australian company like Simplot who supplies to both, you've got quite a lot of bargaining power as well. Where I think it's a real problem is when it's stifling innovation around new products or products which are meeting a need for a substantial number of people but not the whole market. So an ethical product or a particularly safe product or something new and innovative. I think there's a real problem. Woolies gets to decide whether those companies get in there, and the only way those companies enforce their way in is pay huge premiums or basically bend over and do whatever Woolies and Coles say. Same with farmers. If you're a large agribusiness farmer, and let's talk of farmers, let's break that down a bit. A lot of farmers are big companies, they can look after themselves, and they bought out the small farmers. They're also small farmers. So just ask which farmer is talking when you hear a farming line of argument. But big agribusiness is part of the problem. I'll come to that in a minute. Small farmers, if they have something that Woolies and Coles really want, if they're a niche supplier of something that you can get only from those people, they do all right. But if they're just a regular apple grower or whatever, then if they were in Orange 10 years ago and the apple grower, they're out of business now because they have to grow cherries. I don't know if anybody's been to Orange 25 years ago and 5 years ago and you don't see apple trees anymore, you see cherries. And that's because that's what Woolies and Coles wanted. Now, again, there's been a recent innovation here to address that, which is that it's been a voluntary code of conduct, which all 4 big suppliers have signed up to, maybe Costco as well. Who knows whether that will actually make any difference to suppliers. Now, Chris has already mentioned Shopper Dog. I'm going to skip that one, of course he's done that. So just to round out my 6.5 minutes, I think the problem is not so much that consumers are getting screwed on price or whatever, it's that there isn't any choice. There isn't any way for new, interesting products to get into the supermarkets unless Coles and Woolies want them there. So that means that it's kind of like, do you know the story of if there's 2 people selling ice creams on a beach and market forces rule, then although the people may be spread along the whole width of the beach, the optimum place for each ice cream seller is right in the middle of the beach, back to back, in terms of maximising their profits. Anywhere else they go, the other guy will move closer to the centre and will maximise the profits. So in terms of choice and range, they go for the big centre of what people want in an area, which, and there's some geographical income issues there about what they choose, which I won't have time for now, but might get to later. So that's to end this part. I think this issue of choice is really important.
Okay. Is it work? Oh yeah, there we go. Gordon, you've talked about choice. There's a bit of a paradox here because the average full scale supermarket has 40,000 different lines, SKUs in it. So surely there's enough choice there. But at the same time, we know from research and a book called The Paradox of Choice, is the more choice of jam or baked beans there is, the harder it is for actually us to choose everything.
Yeah, so I agree, but I think we see 4 different brands of canned tomatoes, and they've all got regular canned tomatoes with salt in them, or whatever it might be. I mean, you don't see so much in the way of organic canned tomatoes or alternative products. So, yeah, sure, there's lots of choice, but it's they who are choosing what you will eat, and they choose for the broad mass, not for the niche. You know, if you're looking for halal stuff in, not halal stuff, Israeli stuff in, you know, suburb X, you won't find it, whereas in Bondage actually will. Okay.
Thank you. Well, in Bondi, where I live, you get a lot of Israeli. There's a whole kosher section in the new one. So again, that reflects choice. Okay, we're going to talk about the growing cost to customers, suppliers and consumers, although I have to put benefit, because I'm going to argue there are benefits of these guys as well. We have to weigh them up. But my preamble to that is, who should we as consumers be looking after? And Ross Gittins gave a great talk. We have an annual consumer lecture called the Ruby Hutchison once a year. Ruby was a fiery leftist from WA who helped found Choice 50 years ago. Ross gave a great speech in 2011. It's online, you can find it. But essentially my takeout from that was that actually as consumers we need to look after ourselves. Don't be co-opted to defend producers or retailers, because you know what, they have their own organisations. There's the Farmers Association, there's the Retailers Association, there's this, that. We actually have to look after our interests. So that's, I think, is an interesting challenge, because sometimes we can be co-opted and drawn into it, and you're going to find it. There's just been a big competition review came out, which we'll touch on a bit later, and there's an issue around that about pharmacies. And I know there'll be lots of pharmacies saying that actually, you know, we're community service, please help us preserve the advantages we get in the market, as opposed to open it up to competition from, guess what, supermarkets. So there's a kind of interesting thing there. I would suggest from supermarkets getting into pharmacies very good in a way, but by the same token, because that erodes the pharmacy's market power, but at the same time it makes the supermarket stronger. So where does the consumer benefit really lie? So look, in terms of the costs, I mean, doubtless the unconscionable conduct to suppliers, that was outrageous. Coles was trying to gouge a 1% out of smaller suppliers to help pay for a new supply chain. You know, really when there are discounts and that half off, that's not paid by Coles or Woolworths. That's because they say to the producer, we'll promote you on the front page of our brochure, but you actually have to provide it at 50% off. Or there's various tricks in terms of what is on the shelf and what can fall off the shelf, and ultimately their sanction is that we won't stock you. And of course that's the death. And more of that has happened in terms of the growth of private labels. Rosella and Water Wheel Biscuits went out of business in 2012. They claim one of the key reasons for that was because of the financial insecurity caused by the rebates they kept having to give to the big two, and they just didn't have the distribution otherwise. There was the bread, you know, as I've said, there was this bread issue, which there's been other ones, but the interesting one about the bread for me was I wonder where the consumer detriment was, because when we smell fresh baked bread and we go in and we eat it, it's still, we think it's fresh baked. The fact we learnt it was made in Ireland 6 months before doesn't mean that it didn't smell sweet when we got it. But the issue there was that the guys who really made bread and actually got up in the middle of the night to make it couldn't match the price that the par-baked bread could be with Coles. So there probably wasn't a consumer detriment, arguably, but there certainly was a competition detriment because it put bakers out of business. I mean, there's another one in terms of vegetables. Jamie Oliver, Woolworths did a big Jamie Oliver vegetable promotion, and the veggie growers got up because they had to pay something like 60 cents a box to fund Jamie to come over and be on TV and everything. And they said this is unfair because while it was a voluntary contribution, because of the fear and the market power, they felt they had to give Woolies the money. Woolies said it was a great success because we sold 7% more of your vegetables. So, look, these are hard arguments to make sense of. I mean, one of the other detriments of supermarkets, of course, is the manipulation, the way they market it, the way that they put the essential items down the back and put all sorts of tempting items that we have to walk past, how they play with us, how they do music and smells and all the rest of it. I suppose that's not just supermarkets, it's retailing generally. talked about private labels. Now, private labels, I put a bit in between a cost and a benefit, because private labels do make things a lot cheaper, and while it has pushed a lot of brands out, I mean, we're going to have 21% of packaged grocery sales of private label at the moment, expected to be 25%. That really puts a lot of those name brands, put them on the out. But again, I would argue that, you know, these are made by multinational companies and they're big enough to look after themselves. And if we choose to get private label products because they're better and we think the quality is good, and that has been the basis of Aldi's success, is really their own private labels, why not? Quickly, in terms of the benefits, look, food has not gone up in price, whatever people say. In fact, food prices have been falling over 5 years. This is Woolies' own research. They say an average family spends $216 on food and non-alcoholic drinks a week. The rise has been about 1.1% over 5 years. General prices have gone up 2.6%. They say if food had kept pace with general prices over 5 years, we'd all have paid another $17 billion. And Coles say that competition has helped save the average family $570 on food and petrol a year. So look, there is obviously this fight. We do get some benefits from it. Very quickly, in terms of the other, I've talked about Aldi already. There is Kogan, who's getting into groceries, packaged groceries now. They're the online supply, have done wonders in terms of electrical goods. They're getting into pantry items. Farmers markets. There's 152 in New South Wales now. 80% of them say that they're profitable. So you can't have farmers markets everywhere, but obviously there is some growth there. Quickly about Coles and banking. Coles say that there's not much confidence in banks because of the advisor scandals. They're getting into personal loans with GE Capital. Woolworths used the word bank for 2 years when they were unauthorised to do that on their website. Coles is going to join the Financial Services Council, at least they're considering it, the first pure retailer to do it. I've talked about the life insurance, pet insurance. Woolworths has lost $400 million with their Masters hardware push, but they're still carrying on because they can see Bunning really coining it. But of course, in the fallout, there's been a massive decline in the number of independents, and in the last 2 years, the number of independent hardware stores has declined by 12%, and there's going to be precious few. I don't know, where I live in Bondi, there's one, and there used to be 3. So really that's some of the issues around the benefits, I think, and the costs of the big two. But over to Gordon, but he might have a question.
I think not.
No.
Okay. Sorry. So going back to choice, I'm going to talk mostly here about what are some of the responses that could be taken to the perceived problems, but I just want to clarify some of the things about choice. The first, I think the way Howard put it is to say it's the illusion of choice is perhaps a little bit better. Of course there are many choices, but they're within a sort of frame of the kind of thing. If you compare even UK, which is likely far from perfect, you've got 6 different big supermarkets with a very different approach to the sorts of stock that they've got. Just a side note, one of those is Waitrose, which has a particular style of goods, a bit more focus on quality or niche or alternative goods. Unfortunately not doing very well recently. There was an article in The Guardian saying let's all go out and help Waitrose now that they've gone down from the 5th to the 6th biggest supermarket because Aldi had overtaken them. Another key point I think is that talking about price all the time I think plays into the hands of Coles and Woolies and their defenders, like the guy who asked Christopher the question about price in the Senate, the senator who did that. Price isn't everything. I'm glad you mentioned Monty Python earlier. Way back when I was young, there was a Monty Python show, and somebody, John Cleese or Graham Chapman, was sitting in a park dressed as a woman, and another Monty Python person dressed as a woman came by, dragging something behind him, her. And the first person said, let's say John Cleese said, "Hello, Mrs. Smoker." And the other person said, "Hello, Mrs. Non-Smoker." And the first person said, "What you got there?" And she said, "I've got a petrol engine." Because she had a petrol engine on the back of her trolley. And Mrs. Non-Smoker said, "Why did you buy that?" And she said, "Because it was on special." The point being, we don't buy on price alone, we buy on value. We buy on, is this thing that does X solve a problem, give me food or wash my hair or clean my dog, worth the $4.27 they want for it? So talking about price alone, when you don't talk about what you're getting for your money, both in terms of the size of the packet, the quality of the goods, whatever else is important to you, and arguably even the experience of shopping, seems to me to be missing the point and playing really into their hands. Okay, so main topic really was what are the responses? Now, who's going to respond? If there is a problem here, who can respond? The answer is the government can respond, consumers can respond, other businesses can respond. So what are the arguments, the policy arguments about what government could or should do, or what have they done? Well, what they have done, as I said before, they had an inquiry in 2008, out of which came the end of restrictive covenants, which was generally thought to be a good thing, the voluntary code of conduct, which is a bit like, will this work? And then the Harper review into competition, which has just been completed, has recommended that we change competition law. This is a bit of an arcane lawyer thing, but the problem with competition law at the moment is that it says you can't abuse your power if we can, but we have to show that your intention, your purpose was to abuse your competitive position. And Harper has said, and Choice would agree, that really you shouldn't look at what people's purpose was, you should look at what the effects of, is the effects of what you did, the restrictions you placed on the supplier or your contracts with your landlord or whatever, was to reduce competition. If the effect of it was to reduce competition, then you should be guilty of a breach of the Act, unless certain defences apply. Harper's recommended that. I think its chances of getting up pretty slim. Chris Bowen's dead against it. I'm sure that the government itself is pretty ambiguous. So, and who knows, I mean, the claim is that there are, the sort of talk in the legal profession is this might be good for suppliers and businesses, and Woolies and Coles hate it, so that's kind of suggesting it might be a good thing. But, you know, I'm not confident it's going to make that much difference. There is, of course, using existing law. Is the problem that the law wasn't good enough, or was the ACCC 10 years ago asleep at the wheel? And have they come to life to some extent, which I think is Christopher's position. Okay, so what about businesses? We've talked about competition, we've talked about Aldi coming in, Costco coming in. Also there's innovation, you know, so you can look at businesses and they can look really secure, like the taxi industry. What a little cosy monopoly the taxi industry is. The only company in Australia who had a 10% surcharge on their credit card dealings 15 years ago, and that was justified to put the equipment in the taxis. Well, that's fine, but 10 years later it was still there, and 15 years later it was still there, and it's even now only been brought down to 5%. So, you know, but they're facing incredible out of the blue disruption from companies like Indiegogo and particularly Uber, which, you know, it's not wholly a good thing for the people who drive taxis, but that's a different question. It's a bad thing for cab charge, and that's a good thing in my book. But perhaps more interesting, things like Airbnb challenging the hotel industry. Is there going to be some kind of disruption based on technology in the supermarket sector? Will online shopping become a thing when people overcome problems like, I'm nervous about buying apples online because they might not look any good and I don't trust these people? So is it a trust question, or is it about delivery? Is it, I'd like to buy online but I live in an apartment building and how the hell are these, and I work till 7 p.m. at night, how am I going to get a delivery? These problems are solvable though, and they may well be solvable through Uber. One interesting presentation out there on the net, this guy speaks twice as fast as I do, so you have to watch it 3 times to understand what the hell he's saying. But he's basically saying that Amazon, the world's biggest online retailer, the threat to Amazon is Uber, because Amazon's big problem is delivery, and Uber is a system for delivering people, but why not groceries? So, and BlaBlaCar, which is a car sharing thing. So very interesting developments in that delivery space. So all about business, I think, well, there's a question there, something could happen. I don't know what it is, but something could happen. And finally, let's talk about the role of the consumer. Why, if the consumer is upset about the way things are, don't they do something differently? What is it in us that stops that happening? You know, we've got this trade-off between choice and convenience, and low prices and convenience, and to some extent choice in the big supermarkets versus going to the guy next door. Are we brainwashed into going to supermarkets? Do we really love it? Are there ways that some third party, rather than trying to compete with the supermarkets, could make it easier for us to make the choices we want to make? And I suggest that for many people those choices are not around price, they're around quality, they're around safety and health, they're around ethical issues they care about, like free-range eggs, or the treatment of workers in the Thai tuna industry, or dolphins in tuna, those sorts of things. And this is where Good On You comes in, shameless promotion bit. I mean, we're trying to make it easier for consumers to make choices around the ethical issues that are important to them. And I won't extend the commercial beyond that. If you are interested in that, go and look at goodonu.org.au. But what I'm trying to say is there a way, rather than saying, you know, government break up Coles and Woolies, which I think is a good idea but isn't going to happen, Can we change the shopping experience to give consumers more power? So can we acknowledge that consumers do this because they're short of time, because they're told they have to be driven by price, but also empower them to bring into their decisions the safety issues, the health issues, or the ethical issues that they care about into their regular shopping, whether that's clothes shopping, which is where we are, or supermarket shopping, where we want to be one day. Final issue, am I way over time? I certainly am. Final issue, really quickly, is I've mentioned health a couple of times, but I forgot to give my stat the first time around. We not only have the most concentrated supermarket sector, we have one of the two unhealthiest supermarket sectors. A review of 8 countries, all the English-speaking large countries, Canada, New Zealand, US, UK, and 3 or 4 European countries, showed that we have the most soft drink on sale in our supermarkets, the most shelf space and the most end-of-aisle space of any of those countries. And for confectionery, we're second only to the UK. So, and it's worse in lower income areas than in middle income areas. So we have this problem of the supermarkets having control of our choices has fairly significant public health and public interest consequences. Questions or?
I'll just summarise, but yeah, look, that's, and you know, I don't know anyone who's seen that sugar film. It's well worth seeing, the guy about sugar, but you know, I saw it with Gabriella, in fact, but you know, that's part. They've had Jamie Oliver because he talks about fresh food and they sell fresh food, but I wonder if they'd have someone who'd say you shouldn't get all this sugary stuff. You know, that's going to be the real challenge. Look, just to wrap up with some of those issues, there's something I call the Davini effect. Tim Davini is a professor at UTS, and he wrote a book called The Myth of the Ethical Consumer. And in that there's a line that says, the person who is the survey radical becomes the checkout conservative. And that is that people say, yeah, I'll buy environmental this or green that or dolphin friendly the other, but when they get to the checkout and they see the price, they pike and they go for the cheaper one. So that is a phenomenon that we have to admit, but you know, part of it is that people need more guidance, more explanation of where value really lies. I really blame the government, all of them. They go on about the cost of living, price, and with the supermarkets, cheap, and down, like cheap is best. Obviously we like things that cost less than things that cost more, but what is the real price of that? To us, to others, to the world, the externalities as the economists talk about it. And of course most people won't understand that, but it is the role, I think, of government to try and explain these things. And of course that's why carbon tax didn't get anywhere, because they just couldn't actually explain why you had that, what you were actually paying for. So I think we need to do a lot more education and show some real leadership. I mean, what is market power? One of the good things that happens is economies of scale. People get big, they get economies of scale. The supply chain in terms of the big 2 supermarkets has made things far cheaper, but that entrenches market power. So obviously there's a balance, and again, maybe that's where you need the regulators to come in. But, you know, as Gordon said, I've got a book here called Tescopoly, about Tesco in the UK. And, you know, it has a whole list of what are the interventions government could do. And really they are mostly around codes of practice. Well, we've now got one of those, grocery code of practice, or divestment. And actually that's somewhere the ACCC doesn't have the power or really the appetite to go. So I think we do really rely on consumer power. I work with various groups who'd like to change the world in various ways, and they've done lobbying and all the rest of it. I'm interested in how you can change the world through our consumer choice. And not just with the usual suspects, but with mass markets. And you can, you know, that takes time and you need patience. But ultimately, the way we buy, something about Coles and Woolworths and the data that they get and they collect from the everyday reward, loyalty cards, etc. is they know exactly what we do, when we do. But if we don't do something or we change our behaviour, they know about it very quickly. And if you can coordinate people around that, then you can send messages to them. And look, you know, most organic food in the country is sold through the supermarkets. Coles has sow-free for the pork products. You know, Woolworths isn't going to only sell free-range eggs after 2017. Aldi, interestingly, say they'll give the consumer choice. You can get any kind of eggs at Aldi and make that kind of decision. So I'm really very interested in what the consumer can do, although it is hard because, of course, we love the patience, we love the convenience, and everyone always says they're so busy. But, of course, it should take time to shop. But at the same time, the conflict is people want otherwise. I'll just conclude by saying, to me, the root of this problem is one that we have in our society, and that's what is called consumerism. that we want everything all the time at cheap prices, and we want more than we need and more than we can possibly use, and we end up getting it. So it's bigger than just supermarkets. The supermarkets respond to our demand. At the same time, our demand can change what the supermarkets do. I think we see that in small ways, but it can go a lot further.